as Lance mentioned, there's all these neat things working in and among Gwaii Haanas to make it really rich and productive. And because of that, over 20 species of cetaceans can be found there. The problem lies in this. It is a very remote area, and it's very, very hard to get there sometimes. So how do we study these animals? Now, there are big-scale surveys going on around the coast of BC, including around Haida Gwaii and the Gwaii Haanas Reserve. DFO recently, over the past few years, did start several large-scale surveys. I'm sure Parks Canada is doing a lot of work themselves, independent researchers, but these types of big surveys are very logistically and very financially difficult, especially in a remote area like Gwaii Haanas. So while this is very, very important, we can't go there very often. We can't be there very often because it's really costly, pretty much. So what the BC Cetacean Sightings Network wants to do is to supplement data from these big surveys by folks like you, people that are using the park, people that visit the park, people that work within the park in ecotourism and in fishing, and also people that live in and among the park reserve. So in a nutshell, the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, and I should preface that cetacean is just a big word for whales, dolphins, and porpoises as a big group, but our sightings network is a partnership between the aquarium and fisheries and oceans, and we are funded by the Habitat Stewardship Program. Got to put a plug in there. A big part of what I do is do a lot of outreach on the conservation of cetaceans. Won't talk about that tonight. What we're going to talk about is the other half of our project, which is where we collect sightings of whales and dolphins and porpoises and sea turtles, who become an honorary whale when we're talking about our oceans in BC, from people that are on the water, coastal citizens, recreational boaters, and professional mariners. Now, on a coast-wide scale, what we've been able to gather in the 10 years that this project has been going is 44,000 sightings from the coast of British Columbia. So it's a pretty big data set at this point. Over 1,800 observers send us sightings, and to date we have reports of 23 different species of cetaceans and 2 species of sea turtles in British Columbia. Now, this is a very wide, coast-wide look at our data, and tonight we're just talking about Gwaii Haanas, and one of the neat things we can do is really localize on certain areas. So we have about 2,200 sightings from in and around the park reserve, and I've broken them down into toothed whales and baleen whales tonight just for ease of explanation. And it's really, really convenient in that it's almost half and a half, toothed whales and baleen whales, when we look at the reports we have been able to collect. So this is a first look at our toothed whales in the Gwaii Haanas area. And I really like maps because they really help you visualize what is out there. So probably what you're noticing off the bat here is that there's lots of green dots, which are Pacific white-sided dolphins, and lots of black triangles, which are killer whales. I'm not going to talk too much about them because Lance has already talked a lot about killer whales. They are our most commonly reported species, probably because they are so visually easy to find. But what this kind of map really represents to me, or what gets me excited about our data, is when we can look at things like hotspots. So when we look at this data here, if you have a look at this nice little white patch down here and all the white dots up here, these are all sperm whales. We don't get a lot of reports of sperm whales. This is an incredible hotspot for these incredibly big toothed whales. They dive very deep, over a kilometer. They can dive for over an hour, and they like deep water. And right south of the park and all along the west coast, where the ocean basically drops off to 2,500 meters or 25,000 meters down very quickly, is where we can find things like sperm whales. The other thing visualizing it this way really points out is some really unusual sightings as well. And the one that got me really curious this year was all these red dots you can see along here. There's not a ton of them, but what they represent is a species we don't know very much about in British Columbia called a rhesus dolphin. Now, what we know about rhesus from the rest of the world is that generally they're really pelagic, and that means that they really like to spend time in open water. But if we click back to that map there, look at where they are. They're all in these really shallow little inlets. And in particular, there's a little inlet in the park called Bag Harbor, where we've received all these sightings of rhesus dolphins in really, really shallow water. In 2005, we received 15 sightings in Bag Harbor. Again this summer, another 5 sightings of rhesus in there. So Why we don't know why they're there, we're not sure, but indeed it is something like collecting this data that allows us to begin to ask questions and to really pinpoint areas to begin to investigate. Now, the other half of our data, of course, as I mentioned, is our baleen whale data. And you're obviously noticing right away lots of red dots. As Lance mentioned, this is a great area for humpback whales, and that's what all those red dots are. But again, we can look at hotspots and rare sightings down along the south here, and also just north of the park near Sandspit, lots of gray whales. As Lance was mentioning, they actually do take little detours off that beeline to the Bering Sea from Baja to stop and have a feast right around the park. They like shallow waters, they like to feed along the bottom or sometimes in kelp beds. So again, we can look at these neat hotspots that the park and the surrounding areas are really preserving for these animals. Rare sightings here is not a baleen whale, but the ones I really wanted to point out here are these little brownish yellow dots that you're seeing in and among the park. And this is not a baleen whale, but of leatherback sea turtles. Now, leatherback sea turtles are an incredible reptile. They can get up to 9 feet long. They can weigh as much as a Volkswagen Beetle, imagine. And they're coming up here not by accident. We're often surprised to hear of sea turtles in BC waters. We think of them in the tropics. But they come here very specifically, all the way from their nesting beaches down in Southeast Asia, over 20,000 kilometers. And the reason they come to areas like Gwaii Haanas is because they like to eat jellies. And in these cold, nutrient-rich waters, this is a great place for them to find their food. Leatherback sea turtles are critically endangered around the world, so it's very important to learn more about where they are. Now, that brings me to my last point about what we can learn from our park users. Yeah, it's cool to look at hotspots, and it's really fun to look at those rare species, but what's the point if we don't do anything with it? So indeed, we do a lot of data sharing. In the last 12 months, 16 different projects, everything from recovery plans, environmental impact assessments, researchers have used our sightings. We also do a lot of conservation analysis, and a really good example of this has to do with those humpback whales that both Kathy and Lance talked about. Humpbacks are recovering. They are still listed as threatened. And one of the main anthropogenic threats, or people-made threats, to humpback whales is entanglement. Have a look at this whale. You can see that there is a rope right above his pectoral fins. This summer in BC, over 10 humpback whales were entangled, and those are just the ones that were reported. There is probably very many more. 8 have been reported within the park reserve of entangled humpback whales. So what we can do is start to look at where this is happening and how can we prevent it. An example is taking our hotspots of humpbacks from along the coast of British Columbia and overlaying it with fisheries effort. This is just an example of crab fishery effort. So we know that crab traps can entangle humpback whales. Where are there lots of humpback whales? Where is there lots of crab fishing? Where might be the areas we need to watch out for? And if you have a look right here along the east coast of the park reserve, this is an area we have to watch out for. This is an area of entanglement risk for humpback whales. So we can take this information, we can work with recovery teams, we can work with the newly formed BC Marine Mammal Response Network, which tries to respond and help these animals in distress, but also looks at trends for planning, for legislation, to help work towards conservation of these species. And this is just a bit of an example. So in conclusion, hopefully what you've got from tonight and from my talk is that indeed Gwaii Haanas is an incredibly unique area. But because of the logistics of the area, we have to come up with unique ways to collect data to help supplement a lot of those scientific surveys that are going on. So I hope that no matter where you travel along the coast, now that you've heard this, you may want to get involved as well, and anyone can help out. So please do. We have some pamphlets outside. There's many different ways to report your sightings. The phone, we have a catchy phone number, 1-866, I saw one. Email, we have an online web form that takes 3 minutes. I timed it the other day. We also have logbooks for people that spend a huge amount of time on the water and see a lot of cetaceans. Do check us out online as well at wildwhales.org, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the lecture series. Thanks.